just come before him tonight with thanksgiving for all he's done for us. Turn your ear to heaven and hear the noise inside, the sound of angels, all the sound of angel songs, and all this for a king. We could join and sing all to Christ the King. How constant, how divine, the song of ours will rise. Oh, how constant, how divine, the song of ours will rise. Rise, oh, praise him. Oh, praise him. He is holy. He is holy. Turn your gaze to heaven and raise a joyous noise. Let's hear a noise. The sound of salvation come, the sound of rescued ones, and all this for a king. Angels join to sing, all for Christ our King. Oh, praise him. Oh, praise him. He is holy. He is holy. Oh, praise him. Oh, praise him. He is holy. He is holy. Oh, la 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 la. Oh, la 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 la. Oh, la 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 la. Oh, praise him. Oh, praise him. He is holy. He is holy. Infinite and sweet, this love so rescuing. Oh, how infinitely sweet, this great love that has redeemed is one we sing. Oh, praise him. Oh, praise him. He is holy. He is holy. Hallelujah. 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 He is holy. He is holy. Oh, la 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Oh, praise him. Oh, praise him. He is holy. He is holy. Yes, Lord. And you better get noisy. Anybody out there that loves Jesus? Let's just tell him how much we love him with this song. Better than the riches of this world, better than the sound of my friends' voices, better than the biggest dreams in my heart. That's just the start. Better than even when I say I need, better than living the life that I want to, better than the love anyone could give. Your love is, and you hold me now. style. Better than getting what I say I need. Better than living the life that I want to. Better than the love anyone could give. Your love is, and you hold me now in your arms and never let me go. You are Lord with the sunshine, the moonlight, and the night sky. Give me breath and all your love in my heart to you, because I can't stop falling in love with you. I'll never stop falling in love with you. I can't stop falling in love with you. I'll never stop falling in love. You hold me now in your arms and never let me go. You hold me now in your arms and never let me go. You are the sunshine, the moonlight, and the night sky. Give me breath and all your love in my heart to you, because I can't stop falling in love with you. I'll never stop falling in love with you. I can't stop falling in love with you. I'll never stop falling in love with you. Are Lord with the sunshine, the moonlight, and the night sky. Give me breath and all your love. Give my heart to you, because I can't stop falling in love with you. I'll never stop falling in love with you. I can't stop falling in love with you. I'll never stop falling in love. Blessed be your name in the land that is plentiful, where your streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name when I'm found in the desert place. Though I walk through the wilderness, blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the Lord. down on me when the world's all as it should be. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name on the road marked with suffering. For there's pain in the offering. Blessed be your name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, oh, blessed be your name. You give and take away. You give and take away. Still my heart will choose to say, the blessed be your name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, the blessed be your name. Blessed, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Yes, Lord. Lord, we bless you tonight. We just thank you tonight.
I'm forgiven because you were forsaken. I'm accepted. You were condemned. And I'm alive and well. Your spirit is within me because you died and rose again. I'm forgiven because you were forsaken.
Jesus, we just give you our praise, our honor. We give you our lives. Lord, it's all we can give. When we give freely, we love you because you first loved us. And what an amazing love. We just thank you so much tonight for that love that did love us first. We just praise you. We love you tonight, Jesus. Amen. You can be seated.
All right, welcome. Hey, tonight we've got something very special. About a month ago, Jake and David Williams and myself were given an opportunity by Fact Foundation and Jennifer Watson. We were presented with a DVD that we were asked to listen to. And after listening to it, we felt that it was so...
For anybody who's not, it's a firecracker that when you light the fuse, it goes up in the air and explodes. Well, when I was about 14 years old, my cousin and I were setting off bottle rockets in his backyard, and we came across one with a curved stick. And yes, I lit the fuse. And when I lit it, it went up in the air, it came down, it hit the back porch. The kitchen door was open. It went in through the door, it hit my grandmother's foot, it turned upwards, went up her pant leg, and exploded. There was a hole about this big burned in her pants. She wasn't hurt. I was about to be. But sex outside of marriage is like that pop bottle rocket with the curved stick. Once you light the fuse, it's very hard to put out, and you don't know where the consequences are going to take you.
Rick and I are going to be sharing our story with you tonight. But before I begin, I want to set up a block demonstration that I use to help you understand my story better. And it's a demonstration that helps us understand different kinds of love and different kinds of relationships and how we learn about those. So when a baby comes into the world, the first relationship a baby has is usually with its parents. And that's the first kind of love a person would learn about. It's parental love. And I'm going to also give you the Greek for that. It's called storge. And if you were to write that out, it would look like storage unit or storage. So you can think of little babies as storage units for love. They're just like, fill me up with love. Okay, so babies need your love. And the parents are there to provide things like diapers and bottles and cribs and protection. How many are familiar with the Romanian orphanages, what happened in the Romanian orphanages? The babies had their food and their clothes and their water, but they didn't have enough people to hold the babies and play with them and coo with them. And you know what happened to the babies? They started to die. They literally started to die. They called it failure to thrive. So humans are made with the need and desire to get that tender love and care. Now, as this person begins to grow after they've got all that in place, and they become toddlers, and they're called toddlers because they're beginning to walk now. And as they're walking, they need more boundaries. They also need to be challenged more. They're ready to learn. So you usually give them more books and toys. And they're starting to share their toys, possibly with brothers and sisters or with friends. They're going to their first birthday parties, making friends. So that's the next kind of love they learn about is brotherly, sisterly love or friendship love. And they still need all the other things that the parents provide, food, clothes, the extra tender love and care. And then as this person continues to grow and they become a teenager, I hear lots of things that teenagers need, and I think you can think of a lot of them, but I hear cell phones, food, clothes, cars, all those kind of things. And at this stage, friendships are very important. Girls are making deeper friendships with girls. Guys are generally making deeper friendships with guys, but now they're also checking each other out, right? You see that person and you get those butterflies in your stomach, or you see that person, your heart starts beating faster. It's a very normal part of development. You're making a lot of choices right now. Simple things like what color hair, what kind of clothes, what kind of music, but you're making deeper choices. Who am I? What are my gifts and my talents? What am I designed to do in life? And sometimes at that stage, you're thinking about what things are good for you. You might be seeing that boyfriend and girlfriend a little bit like an object, like what they can do for me. And that's more of a romantic type love, and the Greek for that is eros. Oh, and I forgot to give the Greek for the friendship one, it's phileo. So you have storge, phileo, and then eros, and all that's a normal part of development. And when it's all in place, then as an adult, you are now ready for what I would call unconditional love or marital love. And the Greek for that is agape. Now, you do not need to get get married to show unconditional love. But when you decide to marry someone, what you're saying is, I am going to love that person with an unconditional love. I'm going to be thinking about that other person's needs the most. And in a marriage, that is why they have found that the best sex is in marriage. Because sex can be a very giving thing, or it can be a very selfish thing. But if you have in a marriage where two people are committed to thinking about each other's needs the most, now I know we've all seen marriages where that's not the case, but where that is the case, then both people get the best. And when they wake up in the morning, they don't have to worry, is that person going to leave me? Am I going to get a sexually transmitted disease? And if you get pregnant, it's okay. So I set that up for my story. I'm going to get started. I'm the oldest of 4 children. I have 2 sisters and 1 brother. I was raised in a religious home where religion was based on pleasing God with good works and earning your way into heaven. And I thought that the only way that God would love me is if I performed perfectly for him. So I was always trying to be perfect for God. And not only that, I was also trying to be perfect in school. Education was very important in my family, so my brothers and sisters and I, we were always trying to get the A and the A+. Well, when I was 12 years old, there was an adult male in my life who started to molest me. Now, my parents ended up getting divorced shortly after that began, and we moved, so that ended the abuse. But at the time of my parents' divorce, I found out that my father, he was leaving my mother for another woman. And through the divorce, I found out that my father had actually been unfaithful many times. Well, from the outside, I seemed to be doing okay. But these were my first images of God and of marriage and of myself. I had a picture of a God who demanded perfection and offered me no grace. I had a picture of which marriage and infidelity had been modeled for me. And I thought the only way that I could be loved is if I was perfect. And how do you know when you're performing perfectly anyway? So from the outside, I looked okay, though. I was still performing for God, getting good grades. But remember my little block demonstration? What kind of love's on the bottom again? Parental love. Well, one of my parents just got taken away. On the outside, I looked okay. But on the inside, this is what it felt like. And sometimes the pain for me was so real, it was physical, I could feel it. Now, it wasn't until I was older and around healthier families that I realized that a dad, he's supposed to be there to do certain things. He's supposed to be there to protect you. He's supposed to be there to provide for you. He's supposed to be there to affirm you. That means use his words and his actions to build you up. And he's supposed to give you some spiritual leadership. I didn't know that. All I knew was that something big was missing. And like many young girls without their father, what happened for me is I started to crave male attention. If there was a guy around, I wanted to have his attention. And I started to evaluate my relationships with guys, and I started to think, well, what kind do I want? And do I eventually want marriage? Is it worth it? And I started looking around at the marriages around me, and you know what I saw? I saw more couples fighting. I saw more divorce. And I even saw more unfaithfulness. And I thought, you know what? I don't think a good marriage is possible. I don't think it's even possible. So I gave up my hope. And after seeing my mom divorced with 4 kids, I thought I would rather be single the rest of my life than end up like that. And so I decided to become self-supporting emotionally and financially. And for me, that meant getting into college. And the only way I was going to do that was with a scholarship. So I worked very hard on my grades, and I worked very hard to gain positions of leadership, and it all paid off. I ended up getting a grant and a scholarship to the University of Denver, to DU. Well, I get there, and I am not worried about the grades anymore. Does anybody know why? Guys, yes. And I'm talking hundreds. I mean hundreds of available men. I look out my dorm room, and they're everywhere. So even though I'm doubting the whole marriage thing, I'm thinking to myself, I am going to do something about that craving for male attention. But I'm also thinking to myself, I don't want to be used or cheated on like my mom, right? I am going to be in control of every relationship. And I found this magazine picture, and I thought, yeah, that's going to be me. That's the role of the modern woman. And so I cut that out, and I hung that up in my dorm room. And I thought I had these really high standards, but I didn't. If someone wanted to date me and they didn't have any faith, they had a drinking problem, drug problem, I think, well, that's okay. I can just fix them. I'll just fix them. But really what I wanted to fix was this. And when I started, I'd start a dating pattern. I'd pick a guy, and I'd date him for about 3 months while that infatuation period's going on. And then after the infatuation period ended, I broke it off with them before they could break it off with me. And really what started for me was this process of picking a false god and worshiping that false god until I became disillusioned, and then I picked a new one. Now, I didn't see it that way, but that's really what I was doing. And what I did not do for myself is I did not set for myself any clear sexual boundaries. And so what happened for me over my first year is my sexual boundaries deteriorated. So finally, my sophomore year, I was working late in the library one night, and this guy I'd been dating was waiting for me afterwards. And he says, "Hey, Barb, why don't you come to the apartment?" I lived in the dorm. I knew I should go back to the dorm, but you know what? I wanted this guy to love me. Did you see where the top block fell when this broke? The top block fell all the way down here. Falls to the bottom level. And sometimes when we have brokenness in our lives, in our families, or by our decisions, this top block where sex belongs up here, it falls to the bottom. And we try to start fixing the pain in our life with that block, with sex. And we start to confuse sex and other kinds of love, and that's what I did. So I wanted this guy to love me, so I go back to his apartment. And honestly, I was curious about sex. I was. So this became my first experience with sexual intercourse. They say most people regret not waiting, and I became one of them. It was horrible. It was awful. I just cried afterwards, and I said, "Take me home." We know in God's economy, everybody eventually regrets it. Well, that was my first time. A little bit later, we broke up. Well, at the same time, I'm taking this philosophy class, and this philosophy class said that God and religion were just man-made inventions to keep social order. Well, I thought, yeah, that sounds pretty good, because I was feeling so guilty from what happened. I thought, I don't need to feel guilty. There's no God. So I just abandoned my religion, and I spent the next few years doubting whether God really existed and doubting whether a healthy relationship could exist. And I didn't know that those two things are so closely related. I just kept thinking, dating is really hard because I kept staying in that same dating pattern. One time I was even sure we were in love. Okay, we were so in love. And I'd always heard that it's okay to have sex if you're in love, right? You don't need long-term marriage commitment, just be in love. So that's what I believed, wasn't worried about the consequences. But over time, we're not committed. We start seeing the things we don't like in each other. The infatuation period wears off, so what do? Break up. So I go through this process. I'm in pain. I graduate from DU. I still don't know anything about healthy relationships. It's still in my process. But finally, when I'm 25 years old, someone showed me in the Bible where all have sinned and fall short of God's glory. And for me, that was the first time that I heard about grace and that God would love me despite whatever my performance was. That was the first time I really understood that. And for me, that was such good news. And so I started reading the Bible, and I started reading Romans and Ephesians. And I read in Ephesians 2, 8 through 9, where it says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this not of yourselves, it is a gift from God, not works, so that no man can boast." Well, my heart knew that was the truth. My soul longed for it. So I admitted my inadequacy, knew I could never earn heaven, and accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. But did I change my dating behavior right away? No. Because I really didn't know God's plans for marriage and relationship, and I still stayed in my dating behavior. Well, finally, after 6 guys, I thought, I was doubting that whole marriage thing, but this isn't better. This isn't better. I do want marriage. I do want someone who's going to be committed to me and love me and stand by my side. But I didn't know anything about healthy marriages, and I didn't understand about the craving and the driving that was driving me for that male attention. So I started researching. I started getting books on healthy relationships and marriage. I started looking at marriages again. And you know what I found this time? There are happily married couples. There really are. I had just not seen them in my little circle growing up. So I started to interview them. What makes a good husband? What makes a good wife? What am I looking for in a man? What do I need to become as a woman? And I started to realize that God's plan for a marriage is a picture. The picture of a man and a woman is the picture of God's church and himself, and he calls his church his bride. The point being the relationship with one spouse pictures to the entire world our relationship with one God. And I started to realize that this brokenness from my dad being gone, it wasn't going to be fixed with a guy, and it certainly wasn't going to be fixed with sex. But that what I needed to do was turn to God and ask him for healing for all that pain that was inside of me. And I needed to ask him for his help to help me forgive. And then I needed to trust that he could meet those needs unmet by my father. And as I learned about God's plans, I decided that I would renew my virginity. That means I decided that I was not going to have sex again until I got married.
Growing up, I had father who gave me a very good example of faithfulness to my mom. And I actually became a Christian my very first day of college and was surrounded by Christian mentors who taught me to honor women. And I knew that I wanted to be faithful to my wife, and I knew that that faithfulness had to begin even before I was married. So to do that, I did a few things. First, in high school and before, I had been involved in pornography, and I made a huge effort to make sure that I didn't view any of that. When I started to date a girl, I would tell her that I was planning on remaining a virgin until I got married, and that we wouldn't be getting very physical. I wouldn't go alone places with a girl unless we had something very specific to do, and then we'd leave right after that. And I asked my friends, and in college, my roommates, to keep me accountable to how I was honoring women. And I did all that, not because I thought I was strong, but because I knew that I was weak.
So although it took me longer than Rick to surrender my sexuality to God, I sure was glad when I did, because when I was 27 years old, I finally met the man of my dreams. And this guy, he truly had God first. He didn't have money first, he didn't have his career first, and he wasn't even going to make me first, another false god. And this guy, I knew by then I needed a guy who'd provide for me, protect me, affirm me, and offer me spiritual leadership, and this guy could do it. And on one of our first dates, this guy tells me that he's a virgin, 27 years old, and he's a virgin. Well, I'm pretty excited about it, but I don't say anything, right? Because I've got this past. And I'm thinking, what's he going to do when he hears about my past? Is he still going to love me? Is he going to be upset? So I don't say anything right away. I'm waiting for the right timing. We're moving along. We're definitely heading towards marriage. So I get with some good friends. We pray, and I go to tell this guy. And honestly, this guy, he was disappointed. He was disappointed because he knew that I had bonded with all those other men. And he knew that if we got married, I would be taking sexual memories of other men into our marriage bed, and that could cause problems. But he says, you know something? He goes, I know that God has forgiven you. And he said, I want to offer you my forgiveness also. And I told him I'd learned about healthy relationships and I renewed my virginity. And he said, you know, I am not as concerned as much with your perfection as much as I am your direction. And again, there was God's grace for me. And I was so happy. I thought, woohoo, all right, I got this great guy now. I'm heading towards marriage. Everything's going so good. I was so happy. And I just, I was thinking about us, but I started thinking a little bit about it some more, and I thought, well, this guy's a virgin, and I really had never been tested for sexually transmitted diseases. So I thought, I'll just go get tested, and then I'll never have to worry about my past again. I could put it behind me forever, my sexual past, because I was sick of it. So there's an anonymous testing center downtown. You went down on a Thursday. They drew your blood. You had to wait 2 weeks. I wasn't worried. I never paid any attention to facts regarding STDs. I didn't know that every 11 seconds a sexually active young person gets an STD. I didn't know that 1 in 4 sexually active young people will get an STD every year. I didn't know there were over 25 different STDs. I didn't know, and I didn't care. So after 2 weeks, I go back. I didn't tell this guy because I didn't think there's going to be anything to tell him. I'm sitting in the lobby, and they had these magazines about home decorating. So I'm looking through them, thinking about how I'll decorate when I get married. And the counselor calls me in. And the counselor says, your HIV test came back positive. I knew HIV caused AIDS. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of somebody taking a giant vacuum, sticking it under your body, turning it on, and sucking all the blood to your feet, but that's what it felt like for me. I just stood there. And I kept thinking, this can't be me, right? This just happens to other people. I'm only 27 years old, I'm in love, and I want to get married. This cannot be me we're talking about. So I'm standing there, and I'm trying to figure this out. So I think, okay, there's just a mistake, right? There's just a big mistake. So I asked the counselor, could there be a mistake? And the counselor said, well, we'll do a retest. And I said, great, can I find out tomorrow? And he said, no, it'll take a week. I said, a week? I've got to wait another whole week? And he said, yeah. And then he drew more blood right there in his office. Then he takes me in this other room. And in this room, there's this woman there, and she's from the Colorado State Health Department. And she says to me, this disease is so dangerous The only way we can keep it from spreading is to get anyone who's been exposed tested. She goes, we need you to give us the names of anyone who's been exposed. I am in shock. I know very little about AIDS, and now this woman wants me to tell her my whole sexual history. She goes, it's an anonymous testing center. We don't know your name. So when we call those guys to tell them to get tested, we won't tell them your name. So I said, okay. So I gave her 6 names. I went home that night, and despair had a heyday with me. I don't know if you've ever encountered that voice of despair in your own life, but you know it's the enemy. And he said to me, Barb, your life is over. Because everyone's going to reject you. The man you want to marry, your family, your friends, your coworkers, church members, and honestly, most of the world. Because this was in 1993, and AIDS was viewed as leprosy. Do you guys know what leprosy is? It's like this nerve skin disease, and if you even touch somebody with it, you could get it. Well, that's what I thought with AIDS. I thought if anybody touches me, they'll get AIDS, so no one can ever touch me ever again. I pictured myself covered from head to toe in sores, rail thin, weak. I pictured myself dying alone on a mattress in pain with nothing. And for the first time, I faced the fact that going outside of God's plans for sex within marriage wasn't just a walk in the park called dating is hard, but actually it was really about a spiritual battle going on to destroy so much of the joy that God had planned for me. And I started to realize that my sexuality, it wasn't there just for my own pleasure, but it was really a doorway for so much of what God wanted to give me and so much of what I could give to him. And I remembered reading, flee sexual immorality. For all other sins a man commits are outside his body, but he who sins sexually sins against his own body. And do you not know that you are a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your body. I lay there that night crying, going, it's too late for me. It's too late. I didn't listen. I've destroyed this temple. I spent the whole night crying. In the morning, I'm still crying, and I remember that this guy I'm in love with, I'm supposed to have dinner with him. Now, my original plan was to wait the week for the retest results before I told him anything, but I was too broken up. I couldn't stop crying, and I thought, there's no way I can hide this from him. And we had such a transparent relationship, I thought, I might as well just tell him. But then I knew he'd leave me and I'd be alone. So we drove to the park that night, and I can't even look at the guy, otherwise I'm going to break down crying. And so I finally get it out, finally said, remember when I told you I wasn't a virgin? Well, I went and got tested for sexually transmitted diseases, and the HIV part came back positive. And I was in so much emotional pain that I did one of those silent screams. I just doubled over, and I was like, so this guy, he goes to hug me, and I'm screaming at him, no, don't touch me, because I still didn't know anything about AIDS. But he said, no, it's okay. He said, I was trained at work about HIV and AIDS. It's okay, I can touch you. So he held me, and we were crying together. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to make him break up with me. I'll just get this over with. So I said, I know this is going to change our relationship. And then he said, I want to show you something, and he gently pushed me back.
I gently pushed her back, and I had some business cards in my pocket, and I pulled them out, and I said, Barb, these cards are from jewelry shops. I've been looking at diamond engagement rings because I have committed in my heart to ask you to marry me. I don't know what the future holds, but I love you, and I'm sticking by that commitment, and nothing you do or say is going to change my mind.
That was not what I expected. I don't know if you can even imagine that just the night before I'd realized the extent to which going outside of God's plans had taken me into the greatest darkness I'd ever known. But then the very next day was Rick, and he commits his life and his love to me. And for the first time, I see in a tangible way the unconditional, unfathomable love of God. And for the first time, I see a man that's committed to God who can be committed to me. And that's when I realized that Rick, he loved me with this kind of love. He didn't love me for sex. We weren't having sex. Rick just loved me for me. But I kept thinking, why did I give up my hope that he was out there? Why didn't I wait for him?
Well, as you can imagine, when Barb told me, I was in shock. I was devastated. But I remembered something that I had heard recently, that if our hope isn't big enough for any eventuality, our hope isn't big enough. I told Barb that our hope is Jesus Christ, and he is big enough for this. But when we were sitting in the car, I remembered that Barb had shared with me a few weeks before that she wasn't a virgin, and I had forgiven her. So my choice wasn't, can I forgive her now that there's really big consequences? My choice was, could I love this wonderful, godly woman through a terminal illness? And I knew that I wanted to, and I knew if I relied on the Lord that I could.
So we started the journey together. We were hoping, praying that retest would come back negative, but it came back positive. So they said, you'll need to see a doctor because you're going to need medicine. So I went and saw the doctor. Now the doctor, he didn't believe it. He didn't believe it. You know why? I wasn't sick. There was nothing wrong with me, nothing. So I got a little hopeful. So they took more blood. We waited another 2 weeks. I go back. Rick couldn't get off work, so I'm sitting in there alone, and the doctor comes in, and he's shaking. He said, Barb, they are right. You do have AIDS. He said, I ordered a T-cell count. That determines the strength of your immune system. I don't know how much you know about AIDS, but I didn't know very much. But when your body gets attacked by an infection, you have cells called T-cells. And these cells cry for help. And then fighter cells come and fight off the infection. Well, what HIV does, HIV destroys your T-cells. So the next time your body gets an infection, nothing cries for help. Nothing comes to fight. And the infection just takes over your body. That's why people with AIDS, we get cancer, tuberculosis, yeast infections, all kinds of weird things because our bodies can't fight them off. So the doctor says to me, Barb, a healthy person has between 800 and 1,200 T cells. He said, yours came back at 147. He said, you probably have 2 weeks to a year to live because they only had one drug at the time and it wasn't working very well. And I remember standing in his office thinking, this can't be me. This cannot be me. Went home, called Rick. It was a lot worse than we thought. I started going through the whole grieving process. I don't know if you've ever grieved anything. You go through anger, bargaining, depression, denial. I'd go through all that in one night. Rick would come over and he'd comfort me, he'd pray with me. He'd wear these white T-shirts, and I'd be crying and get them all covered in mascara.
That's when I started wearing darker shirts.
And then before he would leave each night, he would do something that I thought was very strange. He would start giving me all these Bible verses. He'd just tell me all these Bible verses, and I'd be thinking, what's he doing? But then the next day, I'd go to work, and that voice of despair would be so loud, full of fear and condemnation. It would say, Barb, you're going to die real soon. And guess what? You deserve it. And the only way I could stand up under that was to remember those verses that he gave me.
Well, I knew that my words and my wisdom weren't going to be enough to help Barb through what she was going through. So I used God's word. I used verses like Isaiah 41:10 that says, so do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Or 1 John 1:9 that says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. Or in 2 Corinthians 5:17 where it says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come.
So I really clung to that last one, especially with HIV running through my body. I felt so contaminated. And I thought, there's no way I could ever be made new. But Rick would remind me that that was breaking God's heart because his son, he had made a way through his son for me to be new. And no matter what sinful thing we've done, no matter what hateful thing we've done, no matter what addiction we have, God is always there, ready to offer us his forgiveness and make a way for us to be new. And I also had to keep surrendering, fighting this anger at myself. I had to forgive myself. I had to work on forgiving myself and letting God know that God forgave me. So we started to see a counselor.
This affected Barb and I in every part of our life, physically, intellectually, emotionally, socially, spiritually, financially. Barb's going to talk about just a few of the ways that this has impacted our lives.
We went to see the counselor, and the counselor says to me, hey, Barb, there's something you have to do you haven't done yet. And I said, well, what? What do I have to do? And he said, well, you need to tell your family. And I said, what? He goes, you need to tell your family. And I said, no, I got really mad. I said, no, there's no way I'm telling my mom. There's no way I'm telling my dad. I'm not going to tell my sisters and brother. I'm not going to bring all this pain into their life because I made a stupid choice. No, I'm not doing it. So the counselor, he's looking at me and he said, well, Barb, what are you going to do then? Are you going to wait until you are dying and on your deathbed and then tell everybody? Is that fair? I was like, no, okay, you're right. I better tell them now. So we didn't know where they all stood on AIDS, so he said, don't tell them big group, because whoever has the biggest reaction will take everybody that way. He said, it's better if you tell them one-on-one. So that's what we did. Rick would go with me. And I just want you to know that every one of my family members, when I told them, they were devastated. They were devastated. But especially my mom. You never want to have to try and tell your mom news like that. But you know something? I'd always been the perfect girl. And here I was with all my dirt showing, and they still loved me. They still loved me. And Rick would go, he's holding my hand, and at a time when I felt so worthless, Rick was by my side affirming that I had value. And now I always remember that no matter what we've done, no matter whenever we feel worthless, God is always by our side saying, you still have value. You still have value. But I kept thinking Rick and I could be going around telling him some really good news instead of this. Why did I give up my hope? Why did I give it up?
Well, we had to tell my parents. Barb had only met them twice. So she told me that she just didn't have enough emotional energy at that point to go talk to him. I said, okay, I'll go talk to him. If you could just write a letter. It took Barb about 8 hours to write that letter.
I couldn't figure out what to say. What do you say? Basically, all I could say was I was pretty stupid and your son's pretty awesome. And then past boyfriends start calling up because they had been notified by the state that they had been exposed, and so now they're curious and they start to investigate their sexual pasts. One of the guys is newly married and his wife is pregnant. We don't know if he has it, she has it, or the baby has it. We had to wait another 2 weeks while they all got tested. By God's mercy and grace, they came back negative. But then Rick said, Barb, we need to sit down and we need to go through all your past. Not every single detail, but enough so we don't have to keep doing it every time somebody calls. Because every time somebody called, it would bring up more detail. And I would think, is Rick going to leave me if he hears any more of the details? But Rick wanted me to know that his love and his forgiveness covered all the details. But they say what's done in the dark will be brought out in the light, and it all was for me. It all was. Well, we figured out by process of elimination and by all the indications that I got it from that very first guy. The guy who had it is the guy who had the apartment. And that was when I was only 19 years old. And that was in 1984. Now, I didn't find out I was HIV positive till 1993, 9 years later. You couldn't tell by looking at me as HIV positive. Can you tell now? I couldn't tell, and it was in me. It was in me, and I couldn't tell. I slept with those next 5 guys, and I didn't tell any of them I was HIV positive. I wasn't lying because I didn't know, but how scary is that? Every one of those guys was taking the risk of contracting anything that I had contracted from someone else. The lucky ones today are the ones that get an STD with symptoms, because many of the STDs out there right now do not have any symptoms. They just have consequences down the road. I haven't heard from 2 of the guys that could show up in my life and say they got it from me, and I don't know what I'll do. I haven't had the emotional energy to track them down. I never thought my sexual choices could impact anyone but me and maybe the other person, maybe. I never really thought about it. Well, the only way I could make it during this time was to read the Bible, and I was reading a lot of Corrie ten Boom. Are you familiar with Corrie ten Boom? She survived the concentration camps, and I thought, well, she's been through some pain. Maybe she can help me. And one of the things she said that we need to do is put our hands out to God. But she says we need to do it with our palms down. So that way, if anything stays in our life, it's by God's power only. So that's what I did. I surrendered everything. I surrendered my desire to get married, my desire to teach, my desire to have children, just everything. I surrendered it. And for me, this was my time in the desert. You know how God took the Israelites through the desert? This was my desert. And this was his time when he was going in through my temple and cleaning out all the false gods I had put in there. And he would say to me every day in a very loud and clear voice, he would say, Barb, who will be your God? Who will be your God? And my answer came from another great Christian writer, A.W. Tozer. And he said that faith is the constant gazing of our soul upon the Lord. So I would picture my soul as a giant spotlight, the kind you see at car dealerships. And I would turn it on and I would beam it up at God. And I would say, God, you are my God. And I would look only to him, otherwise I wasn't going to make it. Well, during this time, Rick still wanted to get married. Can you believe it? I kept thinking, are you nuts? Are you crazy? No. They're only giving me a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and I was hearing that people who were dying with AIDS needed morphine because it was so painful. I was like, do you really want to go through all that with me? And he'd say, yeah, I love you, and I want to be by your side as much as I can.
Well, we started to seek advice. We started to ask doctors, counselors, pastors if we could get married. Barb thought all of them would say no, but to her surprise, every one of them said yes. An HIV-positive person can get married, but you will have sexual restrictions. So October 9th of 1993, Barb and I did get married. We just had our 11th anniversary.
But you know, the same time we were making wedding plans, I was also making my own funeral plans. And in fact, Rick's parents had given us one of their burial plots. And when most people get married, they can now have sex up here without any worries. But Rick and I, we're going to have sexual restrictions for the rest of my life, whatever that's going to be. And every time there's a new decision or a new event, I keep thinking, why did I give up my hope? Why didn't I wait for Rick?
Well, it's 11 years later, and you may be looking at Barb going, she's walking, talking, moving. It's not that bad having AIDS, is it? Well, if you think that, you're wrong. Barb and I have had 11 years of painful consequences from that one choice to have sex outside of marriage.
We've had to give up having children. When I first found out, there was a 1 in 3 chance that the baby could get it. Now they can give the mom and the baby drugs, and they've got it down to somewhere between a 2 to 8% chance. But for us, that's still too much risk. And personally, there is no way I could ever watch my own baby die with AIDS that I gave to them. I can't even take the chance. The drugs I'm on are so new and toxic, they don't know what that would do to a baby long term. It's really hard to adopt if you have AIDS, and Rick doesn't want to be a single parent, and we don't know how much longer I'll be alive. In the medical world, when they use groups of drugs to fight a disease, they call it a cocktail. Now, this isn't a drink. It's just piles of pills. And for AIDS, there's 3 main piles, and that just gives you an idea of the drugs. Those are the AIDS drugs. I have to take something from each one of those piles. They're divided by the peach lines. Those drugs are very toxic. I have always had diarrhea, headaches, fevers, rashes, weird aches and pains. These drugs are so hard and toxic on the body, you don't have the energy to make it through a full day. They know these drugs can destroy your liver, and they can destroy your nervous system, and they're so new they don't even know what else they're doing to you. Some of the drugs I had to take, these are the drugs, that's how many you take each day. The second one from the bottom, that's generous, I had to take 16 a day. In real life, they're about this big, those pills. When I would take them, it would feel like an electrical charge is going through my cheeks and mouth, down my arms and hands, down my legs and feet. Then at night, I had to take 3 more pills, Sestiva, those orange ones in the middle. And they're basing these drugs on all other kinds of drugs to find something just to keep the HIV from replicating. And this one is based on a psychotropic, which means it messed with my mind. So when I would take it, I would get blurred vision, I would get dizzy, and I'd get paranoid and fixated on things.
Barb's favorite thing to be paranoid about was raccoons. We have 2 little dogs, and she would think that a raccoon was going to come in through the doggy door and get our dogs. She'd usually wake me up about 2 or 3 in the morning, several times a week. Yeah, we had, if I can get there. They're shy, hard to get to. This is our dogs, Rudy and Annie. And she'd think that the raccoon was going to get our dogs. And I'd try to convince her. It was really hard sometimes to convince her.
I'd be hot and cold all night, and in the morning I felt like I had a hangover. Like I spent the whole night drinking and I wanted to get sick. But talk about financial consequences, I had to take those other 8 pills that gave me the electrical charge, and I had to drive to work, because if I lost my job at that time, I lost my health insurance. My drugs without health insurance are over $2,000 a month. With health insurance, they're $200 to $300 a month. So I needed my job, so I would get to work and I would feel very sick until about 11:30, and then it would lift. And I'd feel okay between 11:30 and 6, and then I'd have to go home and start it all over again. And I think, I don't want to do this. This isn't how I wanted to live my life, because I knew what happened to me when I took those drugs. But then I'd start thinking about it even more. And I realized that despair was not only having its way in my life, it's having its way around the world. Because every single day there are thousands of men, women, and children who die from AIDS every day because they have no medicine. And so I said, Barb, At least you've got some medicine. And I would pray to God to take it with a grateful heart. And so I did. But I got very depressed. I was on those drugs for 17 months. You know why? There is no cure for AIDS. There is no cure. And out of those 3 piles, they have to switch 2 of the drugs. Otherwise, the drugs are not effective. I had used all the drugs. There was nothing left for me to use. It's like I'm barely dog paddling in front of this disease. But during this time, God is right there, and he keeps asking me, Barb, who will be your God? And I just keep looking to him. And well, finally, in December of 2000, they came up with 2 new drugs, and those are the ones I'm on now. And for some reason, my body's doing really well on the drugs. I don't have the side effects. I can go a full day. And it's like I've reached a promised land. And now God is filling my temple with his treasures. You know, we kept this thing a secret up until 2000. We didn't tell very many people. But now I'm sharing the story, and God is giving me healing and fellowship. You know, when we surrender our circumstances to God, he may not change all the consequences, but he sure can do things we thought were impossible. And now I realize that when you are outside of God's plans outside of his plans, that's because you're listening to the voice of despair. But inside God's plan is always the voice of hope. When I look back at my own life, despair said, Barb, you will never be perfect. And hope said, I'll take you broken. I'll take you broken. Despair said, you will never have a father figure. And hope said, I will meet those needs unmet by your father. Despair said, no one will ever be able to touch you again. And hope said, I will bring Rick by your side. Despair said, you're only going to live a couple of weeks, a couple of months. And hope said, I control the number of your days. Despair said, you'll never teach, speak, or have children. But hope said, I will make a way for you to share what you have learned. Despair said, you are a temple that has been destroyed. And hope said, I can restore that temple and I can fill it with my treasures. So if any of you are outside of God's plans, it's only because you're listening to that voice of despair. And I urge you, just turn. And I used to say, run into the arms of hope. Run into the arms of Jesus. But you know what? You don't have to run. All you have to do is take one step. And he runs towards you. And he's always there, ready to offer you his gifts of grace and forgiveness. That's our story. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You want to tell him? You're gonna...
Yeah.
Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask, I think David Williams and Jake Wilkinson are around here somewhere. And right now we are going to take just a few minutes. For about the next 10 minutes, we are going to open up this service to just conversation. And we are going to allow you to ask questions. Rick and Barb have come with a loving heart and a generous heart, and they said, you know what? As much as we think this is a message for people to hear, we also think that this is a message to talk about. And so right now, we're just going to make Jake and Dave are going to be available. They've got a microphone. If you have a question that you would like to just ask Rick and Barb, we're going to do that. We're just going to open up with that. And then at the end of service, we're going to take a love offering, and we're going to close off with one last worship song. But I want you guys to hear that the story is not just a story of tragedy, it's a story of hope and renewal, because that's the God we serve. And that there's hope and renewal for no matter what your situation is, whether it's a sexual situation that you've gone through, or maybe it's completely different than the story that they're sharing. Because of God, there's hope and there's renewal. All right? And so if God has been moving on your heart, at the end of service, we'd like to pray for you. All right, so if you have a question, you can just slip up your hand. Jake, David will find you.
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. The question is, how close are we to finding a cure for AIDS? They are not close at all. They thought they were 5 years from finding a vaccine, which would be a shot that you would give to somebody. Rick is still HIV negative, and it would be a shot that you would give to Rick to keep him from getting this. And they did the trials a couple years ago, and they completely failed. I had back problems last summer, and the physical therapist, her brother-in-law, was on the Council for the United States to find a vaccine. And he said they were 20 years from just finding a vaccine. So they're not close to finding a cure. So I really encourage all the next generation researchers and people who are in biology we need some people to think outside the box to figure out something.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my only question is that I just ask that you could pray for me whenever you can. I'm just struggling with a lot of things, and I just need God. I can't live like this anymore. I can't, and I just would ask for
Will
some
do,
prayer.
and come up, and I'll pray with you after this is over. I would absolutely love to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you for being so
you.
vulnerable with your heart. That's hard to do. Thank you. We're very open. You can ask us anything. Yes.
Yes, sir.
I've got one.
Yep.
You guys travel around, you get to speak to a lot of young people, right?
Yeah.
Have you guys seen or heard about an impact that your story is having in the lives of young people?
Yeah, we actually, we started speaking in September of 2002. Before that, we did 2 youth groups, and we expected the parents to come up and say, yeah, this is great. Well, instead, it was the young people coming up saying, no one is telling us what it's like. No one's telling us this story. We never hear this. You need to come to our schools. So we were able to start coming into the public schools and high schools and other youth groups. Well, since September 2002, we've done over 280 presentations. And we now have binders of letters from kids who they're telling us that they are making decisions to wait, to have sex until marriage after they hear our story. And they're usually giving us about 5 reasons why. One is because they've never really walked in the shoes of someone who's living with all the consequences, and now they've walked in it, or they're similar to my story, they don't want the rest of the story, and so they're going to decide to wait. Or that for the first time they've come to a better understanding of what real love is, a deeper understanding, and that is helping them to decide to wait. They've already made the commitment to wait to have marriage, or to wait to have sex until marriage, and we've just reaffirmed it for them. Or they have been given the chance to renew their virginity, and now they want to do that after hearing the story. And that now they also have some hope that a good marriage is possible. Some people didn't have hope, and now that they see that it's possible. So those are kind of the letters we're getting.
Well, one of my favorite comments that's in those binders, a girl heard our story and went and shared it with her boyfriend, and they had actually planned to have sex. She said that she didn't want to now. He pushed. She said, I pushed back. She said he insisted, and I love this line. He said, I dumped him. That's one of my favorite quotes. But we also had a girl, really cute girl, at the end of our presentation when we were speaking this school. Cute blonde-haired kid gave us a note, said, I'm a note kind of person, and just left. We read it. It said that she had found out that she was HIV positive. She had gotten it from a student that had hurt us in a previous class, and that she had lost all hope of ever getting married, and that we had just given her hope back.
But she was only 17 years old, and I think a lot of times that people think they can tell if someone is going to have a disease, and you can't tell, you know. But what's happened is when we come in and speak, the young people want to hear the message. They want to wait because they don't want. A lot of young people know that inside that they should wait, but they think it's everybody else, or they feel that pressure. And so when we come into some of the classrooms and tell our story, then the teachers are like, wow, they get the letters, they see some of the letters, and they're like, wow, this is going on with our kids. They want the whole assemblies. So we are making a bigger impact. And so that's really important tonight. If you guys take any materials back with you from the FACT Foundation into your schools to help get this abstinence message into your schools, so we can start giving strength and support to everybody who's trying to wait, and we can keep building that foundation for this next generation, for yourselves. You guys can make influence and be changes, young people who make changes right now in your culture, in your society. You can make the changes in your school. We've had so many kids take our CDs to their PE teachers, to their health teachers, and they bring us in, and we are changing kids. We are having kids make decisions, whole classrooms, whole groups of girls saying, we were doing all this oral sex, now we're not. I mean, making big changes.
So just out of curiosity, is there anyone in here who maybe would have a different view on sex before marriage? Any of our young people, any of you guys, after what you guys have heard tonight? You can poke your hand in the air. It's okay. Cool. All right. Bigger question
Thank
then.
you.
Thank you.
For you, one people. Mark. How many of you guys have decided to wait now after what you've heard? Awesome. Awesome. That's a world of difference.
The band's going to come back up, but I would like to ask one more question personally. You guys have a great story. But you have a great story in the sense that you have a great guy that said, I'm going to choose to love you.
Yeah.
What do you say to people that are in their 20s, that are in their 30s, that say, Barb, I don't have that. I don't have what you have. How do we get back to this?
Well, one of the things that we get asked about what Christian dating looks like today, and the main thing is that, Rick and I do have each other, but really, we have God first. He has to be everything. When Rick asked me to marry him, that was a huge decision because I knew I thought I was really going to die, and for me to get Rick in love with me and then to watch me die, was that fair? But you know what helped me to be able to do that? Was that I knew that Rick had his hopes and dreams not fixed on me. We cannot fix our hopes and dreams on having another person in our life. Rick had his hopes and dreams fixed on God. And because of that, that gave me the freedom to say yes to Rick. And then Rick, by then, I knew I wasn't trying to find a guy to fill my life. I, by then, had to have everything fixed on the Lord. So that when Rick asked me to marry him, he knew that he didn't have to be everything for me. I wasn't expecting him to fix my whole life. So that gave him the freedom to ask me because there's no way he could have met all those needs. And so since I had my hopes and dreams fixed on the Lord, then together we've been able to make it. And so what I say is just keep your hopes and dreams fixed on the Lord to fulfill your life because He will. We can't have children, but God gives us joy in other ways. And if you don't have somebody else there right now, He can still give you so much joy. And you don't know what's right around the corner. That devil is always going to be trying to give you that message of despair. Don't listen to it. Listen to hope.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. What we're going to do is this. We're going to close with one last song. When this service is done, if you have questions for Rick and Barb, personally, they're going to be right down here. They're going to be hanging out right here. We know that there's more questions that never get answered in a group that's big because people are shy. But maybe you want to have a conversation. You can come down. They're going to be right down here. We also know this, that God moves upon your heart, not just to cause feelings, but He does it to draw you nearer to Him. And there are people in this size of a room this big that have regret. And you hear the story and you go, oh God, I wish I would have did it different. You know what? The story is also a story of hope and renewal. And so after the service, we know it's a big step. But you know what? At some point, you got to make a big step. You got to make the step. We've got a ministry team. Our ministry team is going to be right down here. We would love to pray for you. If you're here with the middle school or the high school, we're going to ask that your adult leaders, that you would find your students and that you would pray with your students. If one of your students comes forward, that you would find them, and just as an adult leader, that you'd go up, put your hands on their shoulder and say, hey, can I pray for you? So, anyway, let's just close this service out with one last worship song. I'm sorry that we want to take this offering too. If this is a story, as the band, as we go into this last worship song, our ushers are here. They're going to be passing the offering plates. But this isn't an offering. This is basically you saying, you know what? I want to reach out. I want to help support your ministry. And so the money that you're giving is going to Rick and Barbara Wise. All right? Thank you.
Take this world from me. I don't need it anymore. I am finally free. My heart is spoken for. Take this world from me. Don't need it anymore.
I was just asked the question, if we were to make out checks, who would you make them out to? If you'd make them out to CVVC, Canyon View Vineyard Church, we're going to take all the money, put it together, and we're going to give them one check. And so you can do it that way. But right now, let's pray. Father God, we just come before you, Lord. Lord, that you are our God.